All right, Jess, are you ready?
Let's go.
All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So, hi everyone, I'm Monica Duran and I'm a customer success manager here at WorkRamp. WorkRamp is the leading end-to-end training platform for educating employees and customers at top companies like Zoom, Square, Slack, and Disney. Now with us today, we have Jess Arias from Vimeo, who will be sharing some key things to keep in mind when building top-notch facilitator guides. Jess brings tons of experience from Apple and Vimeo and over 8 years of experience in the learning and development fields. So I'm excited for her to share some of the things she has learned throughout her career. All right, so today on the agenda, we'll be covering 4 topics. Jess will be telling us about her philosophy on learning, training, and development. Then from there, we will discuss how to get started with classroom training. And then our third topic, we will dive into how to go about building facilitator guides. And then lastly, we'll cover some of the rapid fire questions that came in from the audience during sign up. Okay, so as always for everyone joining us today, if you have any questions, be sure to drop them in the Q&A box and we will touch on them at the end of the webinar. All right, so for our first topic today, Jess, I would love to kick things off with learning a little bit more about you and your background in L&D.
Sure, I'd love to tell you about it. Thank you, Monica. I'm so glad to be talking to you today and in conversation with WorkRamp. So my background, I've been working in learning and development for a little bit over 8 years. I've been the trainer, I've been the training manager, I have been the training designer, and everything in between. My path started at Apple, and originally I really had no intention of getting into training at all. I was really interested in technology. I wanted to learn how to fix things and take computers apart. But in order to go down that path, part of the gig was training customers and leading workshops and working with people one-on-one. And so as I started to do it, I got more comfortable with it, and I realized that I really had a knack for it. And I was put through a formal training for that role, and it really changed the way that I thought of learning and development totally. I learned about how adults learn, techniques that you can use to facilitate trainings to make learning really stick, and I learned that training doesn't involve just talking at people, which was really a game changer. It opened a whole new world to me. And I've really always loved learning, but I struggled as a student. And it wasn't really until that moment, until I went through that training at Apple, that I realized that it doesn't just have to be this one-way thing. Right. So anyway, so from there, I went on to train employees at Apple and lead training programs at Apple, and eventually design trainings for our flagship store in New York City. And I soon after that took an opportunity at a new rideshare startup in New York City. And it was a really scrappy startup. Our small team was trying to disrupt the rideshare industry, and it was a lot of work. We were all kind of building the plane while flying it, for sure. But as the company started to grow and as we started to see a lot of success, there was a really obvious need for a more formal training structure for our internal team and for the drivers that we worked with. And so I was in charge of designing all of that and making sure that our team was set up. And then more recently, I decided to take the leap into sales enablement, and that's where I am now at Vimeo. That's awesome. Kind of a version of how I got to where I am.
Well, that's actually perfect, because I was going to ask you, could you tell us more about your current role at Vimeo?
Yeah, sure. So I manage the enterprise sales training program at Vimeo. Our enterprise team works with clients who are using video to grow their business or to improve their internal communication strategies with video. I am a team of 1, technically. I'm the only person that's in enablement at Vimeo. But
I feel like that's a common trend.
Yeah.
A lot of people I talk to, they're like, yeah, I'm a 1-person team.
I think what happens is that, training is so often the last thing that companies want to spend budget on, but so it ends up being like people that are they find their way accidentally into this role. And so in this case, I think, our team is still really new. And so I'm sort of setting the foundation for what training will look like. And eventually, of course, I'm sure that we'll need to make that up and, increase that team size a little bit.
Right.
But as it is now, it's me in that role, but I work closely with our sales operations team and sales leadership and the people that have been in the role for a while. I am really just trying to make sure that our team has the resources and tools that they need to sell.
Awesome. And I think we actually have other people who've related to you. Somebody else just typed in, they're like, I'm also a one-person team. I'm telling you, it's a thing. It's a thing.
I know. Oh, I know.
All right. So now before we dive deeper into all of this, I'd love to hear about your philosophy around learning, training, and development, and how companies can go about building a culture of learning, because I think that's huge. Is a lot of people don't have that culture of learning, and then it's really hard to introduce it later on.
For sure. Yeah. I think, so if I had to boil it down to lessons that I've learned about training over time, I think the main thing is really meet people where they are. You know, I talked about me struggling as a student. I always felt like the curriculum didn't ever really relate to my experiences. And so I think I've really made a career of trying to design learning so that it meets people at every level, wherever they can be, really decreasing the barrier to learning. So that's one. Another is, you know, telling isn't teaching. And that's something that, you know, in our fields, it's a thing that people talk about a lot, but it's really true. Like, you can't just expect people to learn something if you're just telling them information. So really finding creative ways to reach learners. I think those are my two, you know, top lessons. When it comes to building a culture of learning, I think you're right, Monica, that it can take a lot of work. And it really isn't, it can't fall on just one person. It's a culture thing. It comes from everywhere. But to kind of define what I see as a culture of learning, I think starting with a positive culture, a positive culture of learning is one where people are encouraged to be curious, take risks, make mistakes. The opposite of that, of course, is where people feel like they'd be punished or judged for those things. And what you'll see in those areas is that, you know, you'll start to see a lack of innovation. Who's going to want to start coming up with new ideas if you're worried that you're going to be, you know, judged for it. You'll see a lack of motivation. You will also see it impact the quality of work and, you know, the interactions that your team will have with customers. So nobody wants that. So
I think that honestly, that hits home for me for sure. Like, having an environment of feeling like you can be curious, you can ask questions, you can challenge, like, that is huge. And I think the fact that you pointed that out first with this building that positive culture, I think is definitely right on the money for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a new age. No one wants to start a job and feel like they can't contribute anything and that they can't be themselves. And, you know, so yeah, I think we can all kind of relate to that. Hopefully no one is having that experience at work, but
right.
turn it around for sure. I think a couple of ways that you can really kind of start to change these things is, you know, something that I've done, or a few things that I've done, are really creating opportunities for people to celebrate the things that they've learned versus just celebrating accomplishments. So, you know, find ways to talk openly about maybe something that you've tried and failed at and that you've learned something from. You can do this in team meetings. There are some companies that do Slack channels for, like, you know, a knowledge share where they can just drop in a new thing that they figured out. Create safe spaces for people to ask questions. At Vimeo, we do a weekly, we started this recently, a weekly office hours with our sales engineers. And it's just like a ask me anything type format where people can just come in and, you know, if they have like a one-off question that they might not have asked otherwise, this is like a dedicated space for it.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And that's like a meeting that you guys have, or that's a Slack channel also that you have?
It's a meeting that we have, but we also encourage people to drop in questions ahead of time so that we can kind of like keep a log of questions and help those people prepare to be able to answer them well.
Awesome. No, I think that's wonderful. All right. So now for our second topic, getting started with classroom training. One of the questions I have is, how do you develop a training strategy that covers a diverse range of topics for various levels of training?
Yeah, so I've had to do this a lot, and I have it's a pretty simple strategy for it for me, but it's something that other people have looked at me kind of crazy for. But one thing that you can do, I'm a visual person, so I think when you have a complex range of things that you need to be able to build training on, having a visual representation of that can be really helpful, especially when you're trying to figure out the order that things need to go in. So something I do, and this might not be the most environmentally friendly thing to do, so keep that in mind, but I'll get a bunch of Post-its And I'll even start to color code them and just kind of do a brain dump of all of the things that need to go into this training. So if it's like a new hire training, it could be anywhere from company culture to, technical skills, and you write each one down on a Post-it. You can do different colors for different types of training. Like you might have a skills training versus a technical training, and that'll help you kind of mix it up and not have anything too heavy on one side or the other.
Right.
But then you can outline them, just get them on a wall, and you can find an order that makes sense. Think about how and when the team is going to need to use those things, or what is going to have the highest impact. And then from there, you can start to determine which training methods are going to work better for each. You can start to write out your learning objectives and build your activities. And that's kind of a good way to sort of map it out, or a good way that I have found, at least.
Right. And is this the murder board you were talking about?
Yes. So
when she first said this, you guys, when she first talked about this, I was like, a murder board. I was like, do we have like wanted pictures? And then like, we're trying to solve a mystery. Is this a game we're playing?
Yep. For anyone that has ever watched Always Sunny in Philadelphia, it's like that scene that Charlie has where he has like the red string and he's trying to figure out who the... But yeah, this is something that my former boss joked about when he saw my crazy strategy taking place in a room, and I had so funny.
You're like, we're gonna crack this mystery, all right, you guys?
We're gonna get this guy. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, all right, cool. Well, then I guess the next thing I wanted to talk about is how do you prioritize what your learners should focus on and learn during classroom training?
Yeah. So I think first, really get clear on what the group is going to need to be able to do their jobs well. Focus on the end goal, and there are so many different ways that you can reach that goal, I think. And really thinking like, okay, what knowledge and experience do they already have, and then how can you build on that? And then even is classroom training even the right method for this type of thing? Sometimes it's not. Classroom training can be really good for presenting new information to a group, or creating a safe space to practice, have some group discussion, brainstorming, but it might not be the best for learning the ins and outs of, I'm trying to think of an example, but learning the ins and outs of, I don't know, a specific product feature. Like, it's not always an ideal situation. So really just focusing on what is the end goal? Does it make sense to have this in a classroom? Plan that your training with that in mind.
Right. So then how do you structure hands-on classroom training?
Yeah, so keep it short and simple, 20-minute chunks if you can. As adults, we've got so much going on in our lives, and our brains just don't really focus for much longer after that. So best practice, just keep it short if you can. I think, as far as the actual structure, like what needs to be involved in that, do an intro. You want to set up all your trainings where there's a safe learning environment and people feel comfortable to participate. You can start out with an icebreaker, especially if it's a group that doesn't know each other, or if it's a group that is going to be working together for a long period of time. Something that's going to make them feel comfortable and encourage interaction. And then, of course, share some ground rules, set some expectations. If you can, have your participants, help build that list. And then share the objectives. We talk about learning objectives a lot. Make sure that those are clear to your participants, that they know what they should be getting out of this too.
Right.
And then, like your main training, it's where the learning happens. Try to keep the info sharing short if you can, and then make as much of an activity as possible. And then for reviewing toward the end, leave time for questions, share some additional resources that they can use after the learning takes place.
So the one thing you touched on is the 20-minute increments. I just had a quick question on that. So for the 20 minutes, do you take like a break? Is it like, hey, let's stand up and stretch? Or is it like, okay, we talked about this for 20 minutes, let's transition onto a different topic so I don't lose you? What kind of, I guess, what is the flow of that and the process of it?
Really glad you asked. So I think, sure, you could take a break. But I think really the goal would be, if you're introducing a new concept, go over that concept for 20 minutes at max when it comes to presenting it. After 20 minutes, do some sort of processing activity. Have the team maybe have a discussion about what you just learned, or maybe do a fun activity to put it into practice. Have them do role plays. But any information where a presenter is standing in front of a room sharing information, keep it within 20 minutes. And then after that, try to incorporate some sort of processing.
Got it. Okay, cool. So glad you like touched on that, because I was starting to think, I was like, actually, do we just stand up and stretch? Do we do an activity? Do we move on to the next thing? Glad you kind of dived deeper into that.
Yeah, yeah.
So then what are some of your best practices for delivering classroom training remotely?
Yeah.
The times have changed.
Times have definitely changed. So I think the same sort of takeaway from that earlier question applies here too. Keep it short. Remote training in general is just different by nature. You can't always pick up on the nonverbal cues that you might get when you're standing in front of a room. So keep your trainings short. You know, one thing that we're doing at Vimeo, or one thing that I'm starting to build out now, we just came up with this new sales process. It was a really big undertaking, and I'm thinking through how we're going to get our team trained on each stage of the sales process. And the last thing I want to do is have people sit in a room for hours just listening to me talk and then kind of practicing. So the way I'm structuring it is doing a mini session where we kind of talk about what the objectives for each stage are at the start of the week. Or sorry, starting with one of the stages at the start of the week, doing a deeper dive there into the activities and outcomes that need to happen during that stage. And then we do a quick practice activity in that initial session. And then throughout the week, they're actually going to be working with a real prospect, applying what they learned in that first session. By the end of the week, they're coming back in and they're sharing how that went. So that's right. Going to happen week by week versus doing everything in one classroom setting.
Right. No, I like that. So then for the remote work, you mentioned also keep it short. Is it even shorter than 20 minutes, or is it still like 20 minutes is what you would recommend to people?
Yeah, 20 minutes is what I'd recommend. I think it's harder when you're doing it remote because you can't really just have everyone break out into this. I mean, you could do breakout groups, which can be really effective, but I think, you know, especially for a sales team, they want to be selling. And so you want to try as best as you can to like get them on the job and actually working with something real. When we're remote, it's great to start practicing those things in a short mini session. But as much as you can, especially while we're remote, give them the opportunity to go out and do the job.
Got it. Well, so I love this next question because I feel like this is a question you're probably getting more and more often. How do you keep classroom training fun and engaging while also educational, especially in this remote environment?
Yeah, so there's so many great ways to do this. And you're right, this is a question that comes up a lot. It's so, you know, it's really important and it can be really tricky, especially when you're, you know, leading a kind of dry training on pricing, for example. That's not as fun.
How do you make pricing fun?
Oh, gosh. So yeah, I mean, as much as you can try to create games. Some friendly competition is always good. Some trainings or some activities that can work in any environment are, I really like doing scavenger hunts. You can come up with a list of questions that people can find the answers to if they know where to look. That would be really good if you're, you know, teaching new hires, for example, about the resources that you have at your company or about a new resource that's being rolled out. My former boss at Vimeo did this really fun activity for a contracts training where she created a what's wrong with this picture scenario. So we had an example that wasn't, you know, great. And then we asked participants to like circle the things that were missing and compare it, and whoever got it first wins. So those are just some fun ideas. I think when you're thinking about designing these trainings, you know, just think about whether or not it's actually going to apply on the job. Try to make it as simple as possible. I've tried to present activities that I thought were going to be super fun, but they ended up just being really confusing and falling flat. So avoid that if you can by just keeping it simple and, you know, making sure that it's relevant to the job.
Honestly, back to the basics, because the matching thing where like, what's wrong with this picture? That's a game you used to play all the time. Exactly. You know, when you go to like restaurants, they're like, here's a piece of paper, entertain yourself. And they would do that. But I think that's good. So then I guess, how do you go about finding these icebreakers? Are these things you just made up? Do you talk to people, or is it something you kind of just like Googled on your own? You found all this like, you know, glory of games that you can play?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of all of the above. I mean, I've done so many icebreakers, but I think there are some really great resources online. TD.org has some good lists that you can look up. There are a lot of other resources that you can find, but it's also like, as I've been going through these trainings, I've realized the things that make, help people connect early on. And I just kind of try weird things and see what happens.
See which ones fall flat and which ones are successful.
Took a lot of trial and error for sure.
Right. So then how do you make sure that learners stay engaged throughout the entire training? And do you ever pick individuals to participate? I know this is something we talked about because I was like, I'm pretty sure I'd be the trainer that'd be like, all right, I'm calling on you. What do you think? And you're like, don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, I personally try to avoid singling people out, just because I think, for some people it can create a lot of anxiety. And as I'm sure a lot of people who are listening will know, like once the anxiety takes over, you can't learn anything. You can't start taking in new information. And so I think there are ways to call people out without calling them out. And some strategies that you can use. Just ask everyone to take a second to think about an answer and have them write it down, and then you can go around and have everyone share if it's a small enough group. Break out into small groups. Groups of 2 or 3 are great because it's really hard to stay quiet when you're in small groups. You can do this with like Zoom breakout rooms or other tools that allow you to do this. Have people drop questions in the chat. Using a real customer scenario usually gets people thinking about how they can solve a problem. Those are just some fun tricks you can use.
Yeah, I think the one that resonated the most was you said to break out in like pairs or small groups, because I was like, yeah, it's so obvious. People feel much more comfortable just talking to a friend, and now they've made someone, a friend in the training.
Yeah, totally. I think if you're setting up icebreakers in the beginning, a good one to try is pairing people up at the start so that they kind of have a buddy that will help them feel a little bit more comfortable sharing. And then, yeah, if you are totally stuck and it's a group that's silent and you really need their participation for it to work, splitting them up into pairs is a really good way to get them to talk without making them feel like, they're on the spot.
Right.
Because who's going to be quiet if it's just 2 people?
I know, you're just gonna sit there and stare at each other.
Exactly.
So then how do you measure the success of your training?
There are a few ways you can do this. I think there are it depends on what you're hoping to learn from it. Of course, there are follow-up survey results, so you can send out a form and have people tell you how they perceived the training. This is just going to give you an idea of how they felt about it, which can be useful. You can also do a knowledge assessment or a quiz to make sure that the information that you shared in the training actually stuck. You can also look at job performance, and this is, of course, one of the most important things that you'll want to be able to do. But job performance metrics can be really tricky. There are so many factors that go into it that it's hard to tell sometimes. At least I've sometimes have had a hard time telling whether it's something that's related to the training or some other factor. So for example, with this new sales process that we're rolling out at Vimeo, we're going to be rolling out training, and it's going to be hard to tell whether the improvements that we're seeing are because of the new process or because of the training that we're doing related to the process. So, I'm going to be looking at things like that I think I can tie back to our training, like, accuracy, the number of support requests that are coming in. And I'm sure that as we start working through this, there will be more that come up, but those are some things that I'm going to be looking for right away. But for other kinds of training, like for new hire training, for example, there are some obvious things you can look at, like ramp time and et cetera.
Right. Just like a one-off question, because I know we have gotten this in the past. So with the surveys that you're trying to see, like how successful your training was, what are some of the questions that you ask, if you can name some off the top of your head? If not, like I can always send over a list afterwards once we talk offline.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can, if you're talking about the kind of survey that you're sending to sort of get feedback about the training, yeah, those surveys, you can ask questions like, this training gave me the information I need to be able to do my job well. I felt that the facilitator was engaging. I felt that the content, I feel like I'm walking away learning something new, and sort of give them a scale to kind of rate those things. And then of course leave like open form, free text areas where they can share additional feedback, but those are just some questions. And I can send over one of mine that I've done in the past. If you want to share it out, we can do that too.
Yeah, that would be awesome if you could. Guys, you guys are getting so much good stuff after this. So, all right. So one of the questions that we had come in also when people were signing up is, what happens when a trainer asks a question and no one answers?
Yeah. So we talked about this a little.
Everybody's been there.
Everyone's been there, and I have learned over time to be very patient and be very comfortable with awkward silences. I think, you know, a facilitator has to have a sense of humor about it. You're gonna run into those situations, but you know, if you ask a question to a group and no one's answering, definitely practice getting comfortable with awkward silences. Sometimes silence is an indication that you asked a really thought-provoking question. Other times it's not, of course. Other times,
right.
But sometimes. But yeah, I think, you know, some of the things that I mentioned before, like start with an icebreaker, pair people up early on so that they have a friend. It creates a bond early so that people feel comfortable sharing. You can sometimes identify your super talkative participant and kind of give them the please participate eyes.
I'm sorry, what do those look like? Like
the please participate eyes.
on you.
Yeah, you can, I mean, I think, you know, in general, like try to ask questions that anyone can answer. If you're really stuck, you can start to ask close-ended questions, because then you're really just asking people to say yes or no. Right. Volunteer an answer as a facilitator if you can. Yeah, those are just some ideas.
I like how you said sense of humor, because I think back to like the trainings I've been like in a classroom setting, and I've always thought that the best ones were the people who I thought were funny, because I feel like that livens up the environment, and I feel it's that safe space. Like whenever somebody cracks jokes, I'm like, yes, this is going to be a great training. Of course I'll answer a question. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, exactly. It's more fun, and it shows that the facilitator is a person too. And, you know, no one wants to go to dry, serious training. Yeah. Some trainings need to be serious. I always want to have a sense of humor, but you know, where it's appropriate, definitely
right,
definitely can be useful.
Cool. I do want to mention, I see everyone's questions that are coming in, so we're going to hold them to the end, and if we don't get to them, we will have Jess answer them either by email or however. We'll get the answers to you guys, don't worry. So I just wanted to point that out before I move on to our third topic. So now for the third topic, which is building facilitator guides. I would love to learn more about what the overall process looks like when creating your facilitator guides.
Yeah, so facilitator guides are, just to kind of define them for people that might not know, it's really just a tool for your trainers to use while they're delivering training and before training, so that they can prep and plan and make sure that it goes smoothly. Facilitator guides should really be created after you already know what you want your training to look like and what the structure will be. Make sure that you're aligned with your stakeholders about the objectives. The facilitator guide should really be one of the last pieces that you're working on after you've gotten, you know, buy-in from everyone. Get feedback on the guides if you can from your trainers if you are not doing the training yourself. You want to make sure that what you're creating is easy to apply in a real environment. If possible, get them involved in the creation process too. You know, it can be tough to be a trainer and get up in front of a room and not have, you know, any idea of the context or how it was created. So make sure that you're at least providing that information in the guide if you can't have them involved.
Right.
And something I've done in the past too is really like go up, get some people to pilot it with you. Like do it in a room, now a virtual room, have a guide and actually like try it out yourself, ask people to give you feedback. If the way you present something doesn't make sense, then make that markup. And yeah, those are some best practices.
You mentioned getting feedback from people. Who are these people? Are these other facilitators? Are they just going to be learners that would take a training? I guess, yeah. How do you get that feedback and assess like, okay, you would actually be a good person that I want to run this by real quickly?
Yeah, so I think for getting feedback about the training itself, you'll want people who are, I mean, you can definitely get trainers involved too, but it's sometimes good to have people that are not involved in the training but are hearing it for the first time to make sure that it's coming across clear. for actually delivering the training and getting feedback about it, getting your trainers involved in testing it out to present it themselves is really a good thing to do. But yeah, just get people that will know enough about the content that you're covering to have some sort of context, but not someone who is, who is going to give you information from the same level that you're at as the person building them, if that's
right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. So then from here, how do you build a great facilitator guide to set your trainer up for success? And what are some of the key elements of a great guide?
Yeah, so there are a few elements that you'll really want to include for any guide. A training overview is really good to start with. By the way, we're going to be sharing a guide that I created just as a template with everyone afterwards, so you can kind of see what this will look like. But a training overview is going to help you or help your facilitators with the prep. It's going to give facilitators an idea of where their training fits into the full curriculum, so that they're not, going over too much information early on or covering something that the group already went over. Just giving them an idea of what's already in there. You'll want to include a description and objectives. I usually do this at the top for the whole training, if it's a multiple day training, or at the top of each, and at the top of each section or module in the training. Make it quickly scannable. It'll provide a roadmap. Share timing in there so that your facilitators can stay on track and know where they need to borrow time from if they end up going over. List of materials is always good. I also like to include some example talking points where possible. And I think, my advice with these is keep them short, make them optional. I've gotten in front of a room with a facilitator guide that just had pages and pages of like a script that I'm supposed to read. And when you're up there, you can't do it, number one. And number two, it's not coming from your own voice. You really don't want to make it so that you're like reading a script. No one's going to want to, everyone can see through that. So, so have some example talking points. This can be good for new facilitators, but again, make it easy for them to kind of do their own thing. Make them easy to scan. You can highlight important information with emojis or images. And yeah, I think trust your facilitators to do what they're going to do. Let it be okay for them to riff a little bit. Yeah.
Right. I loved them making it scannable in the talking points and not to where it's a script, because I've definitely been in trainings where they're reading off of it word for word, and I'm like, all right, here we go. This is I'm just gonna sit back. But I like the fact that you mentioned like talking points, and that can be optional. Like, this is a time to like create that environment for people to speak up, answer any questions, things like that. So I really do like that you pointed that out.
Cool.
So I'm sure building a guide from scratch takes time. So how do you templatize a facilitator guide to speed up the creation process?
Yeah, so I think just some, plain design elements are good to keep in mind. You can choose the design that's going to be simple and clean and modular. Include headings, do different colors if you can for easy scanning. Include an agenda or a schedule table that you can just kind of fill in if you need to. But yeah, the key here is really just making it easy to kind of go through and visually see like the different sections that you can plug things in when you need to.
Right. And also, how can you structure facilitator guides so that they can adapt to trainers with different levels of experience in the subject?
Yeah, so I think I might have covered this a little bit in my answer earlier, but those talking points I think are kind of key here, and making them optional. The example talking points can also include some questions that facilitators can ask, especially if they're new, for example. Some questions to ask, and then maybe even some answers to listen for, so that they know how to get the discussion going, or they know what good can sound like. Yeah, and I think, in that first part of the document, you can provide context. So you might even have facilitators that can use your guides to just kind of read that overview, understand what the objectives are going to be, and then, use the activities as a guide, but kind of do their own thing with it. So I think your facilitator guide can really meet a bunch of different facilitation experience levels.
Right. Honestly, I feel after this webinar, I could go teach a training.
Yeah.
Like, I'm ready, you guys. Sign me up. Who wants training?
I know. I should have shared that as the objective for this webinar at the start.
Right. We'll send out a survey. Do you feel prepared to be able to facilitate? Okay, so do you have any best practices for rolling out facilitator guides remotely? And has the train the trainer changed in any way since remote work?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of this will apply to like non-remote work too, but definitely give people a chance to review information ahead of time. Schedule time for you and the facilitator, if it's not yourself, to meet and talk through how they'll present, and do, you know, just some quick practice. Another thing you can do too, if it's someone who who's maybe, you know, someone who wants some extra time to go over it, is send them a facilitator guide without those example talking points that I mentioned, and ask them to kind of fill in their own. You can have them write their own script for it so that they can sort of get their words out and see how they feel. So those are all just some good ways that you can help people practice, especially if you're remote.
Yeah. How long does it, I'm just curious, how long does it take to actually prep someone to do some type of training?
Yeah, it changes. It depends, I should say, on the type of training that you're doing. I've seen facilitators who are just like, yeah, let's get up and do it. I mean, usually I'll try to do, you know, some prep, even if they do feel like they can just jump in. But, you know, for a longer training, you might want to give your trainers a couple of days to prep. I know, you know, at Apple, we did this where if you're leading a week-long training, you're getting 2 full days out of your normal job just to prep and just to go through and run through activities. So it can really vary. And I think it should, depending on your facilitator's experience and the content.
Wow, I was way off. In my head, I was like 2 weeks probably, right? You're like 2 days.
Yeah, sometimes I think, you know, if it is a much longer training, it sometimes can take a little bit longer. Like another thing you can try to do, especially if you have someone that's a little bit slower to start, if it's an ongoing training, you can have them, of course, like sit in on trainings and start to participate a little bit at a time. Like maybe you can get them involved in introducing the activity just so that they get their feet wet with getting comfortable doing that. So
I like that a lot. I think that would be a good way to like warm them up to the idea.
Right, exactly.
All right. So the last topic, I would like to go over some of the questions that came up when the audience signed up for this webinar. So the first one I have is, what makes a great facilitator?
So a great facilitator, in my view, is someone who can be flexible and is willing to, you know, make changes, someone who's quick on their feet and can switch gears. In a training environment, so many things can go wrong, and you want someone that's going to be able to kind of, you know, roll with those changes and be able to still make the learning happen.
Right.
I think the other important thing, and maybe the most important thing, is someone who has empathy and patience for people who are in new learning situations. You know, this is something that you can learn if it doesn't come naturally to you. I didn't start out as someone who was patient with new learners. I would get frustrated a lot, but it's when you are in that position, sorry, I have a fire truck going by. When you are in that position, you'll notice the difference when you're training someone who, when you're not patient and the person that you're training sort of feels that, versus, you know, when you are, and when you can get creative with how to present information to them. So that's, you know, long story short, be empathetic to people in new learning situations.
So how did you go about learning to be more empathetic and patient with people, with learners that maybe this is their first time going through this type of training?
Yeah, so a bunch of different, it took a long time and a lot of practice. And it came from, like, when I would get frustrated at someone or at a group who just wasn't understanding what I was presenting, it just wasn't enjoyable for me. And I realized that as soon as I let go of that control of needing them to have the answer that I wanted them to have, and instead looking at it as like, let's see what they come up with, and maybe I'll learn something new too, and kind of like being able to kind of shift and sort of help people along that path. I think it's just it was a more enjoyable experience for me afterwards, letting go of that need to have them walk away with the, you know, information that I needed them to have, and instead making it more about how they learn and how they
Right.
how they can achieve that goal. I hope that that got a little bit philosophical here. But.
No, I was literally about to, you know how on, what is the game show? Where he's like, good answer, good answer. That's Family Feud. That's exactly what you were saying that. I was like, good answer, good.
Thank you.
All right, so then for the next one is, how can you set your facilitator up for success?
Yeah, so I think we talked about this a little bit, but the prep and the training should happen ideally before the actual presentation. You can have them partner with someone who has a lot of experience and maybe have them practice with them, or again, do those, you know, bits of practice in the room while someone else is leading the main part of the training. As the person who is helping facilitators, you know, also have empathy, because they might be someone, you can think of them as new learners in new situations. So, you know, practice empathy for them too, and try to help them in the way that they need. I hope that wasn't too vague.
No, that was good. That was good. If it was too vague, people, please ask a question and we can dive deeper, because we will have a few minutes to answer the questions. So if there is something that you would like her to dive deeper into, just ask the question. All right. So what systems and tools do you recommend for remote enablement?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many out there now. I think choose a system that is going to make it easy for you to collect your resources and make them easy to find for people. You know, I'm a huge fan of making sure that resources are available. It's really important, especially in a remote environment. So you can choose something that allows you to organize that really well, something that's going to allow you to share your video links, your resources. I have a video library. We usually record all of our remote trainings. This is actually something I think I forgot to mention earlier. For remote sessions, try to record all of your sessions. You know, having a library of these afterwards can be a really good way to build your resource library. So that collaboration tools are great. Quizzes and forms, any tools that allow you to create and organize those can be really useful.
Right. Do you ever go back and watch the trainings just to see, okay, oh, I could have done this better, or actually I should have done this instead of, you know, anything like that?
Yeah, all the time. I think, yeah, for sure. I'm sure I'm going to watch this webinar over and over again and say the same thing. But yeah, I definitely do. And I think the facilitators that are leading trainings sometimes will do that too and learn a lot from it. And then, you know, kind of refreshing your recordings, doing another one if you feel like you need to make a change. Yeah, definitely, for sure.
Awesome. Okay, so then how do you keep your reps focused in training while being remote?
Yeah, so I had an answer prepared for this, and I was talking to my my former manager about this, and just trying to, you know, understand what she's doing and getting a new perspective. And she brought up the great point that, you know, we're not only working from home, we're working under duress, and this is a really challenging time for a lot of people. And I think you can't really expect everyone to bring their full attention to remote trainings right now. It's not realistic, and it's not really, I think, fair. So keep that in mind. Don't expect your reps to focus 100%. Again, record your sessions if you can, so that if someone did miss something, they can go back and review. Keep your trainings short, as I mentioned before. I like having cameras on in the training. Of course, not everyone feels comfortable inviting people into their home, so encourage Zoom. Virtual backgrounds are great for this. You can use polls, Q&A to get people to participate without disrupting a whole group. Those are just some things to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think you're totally right, because even in my customer meetings, I mean, I see their kids all the time. Some of them just like participate, or they'll just be staring at me in the corner. And I'm like, hi.
I know. I've had my cats walk on screen back and forth. Yeah, I think
the things you see nowadays.
Okay.
I wonder what it's going to be like when you go back to the office. Like,
I know. It's gotten so personal. Yeah.
Right. So in our last question of the day before we move to the Q&A is, how do you create learning objectives?
Great question. Learning objectives, just to kind of define them, they're goals that you want to achieve through training. They should be observable and measurable. A way to create a learning objective is really to figure out, you know, what is the end goal of this training, and then you can even use the sentence, following this training, participants should be able to blank, blank, blank. And if you want to go further, participants should be able to blank, blank, blank by this time and to this, exact way, or depending on the training that you have. But that's just an idea of how you can structure it. And it's, learning objectives can be really useful for facilitators to help them get on track if things fall off course. It's the one sort of guiding thing that you can use in your trainings to make sure that your training is effective. It's the way to really measure, to allow you to see whether or not the training worked. Did you meet the learning objective?
Right. Cool. All right. So are you ready for this, Jess? We're going to go to the Q&A.
Let's do it.
We have about 13 minutes left. Okay. So the first one came in from Natalie. She says, what is the ratio of reps you support since you are a one-woman team?
Oh, so I am a one-woman team. It's true. Our sales team is close to 100 people. So it's not possible for me to be the person that is dedicated to one particular team. It's really like, we have to get creative with this. And, I think it makes sense. Like, we are still in the stage where we're figuring out, we're working on our sales methodology, we're growing our team, and it's important to kind of have a foundation before we start expanding. But I think, so I'm responsible for designing training for a lot of people, but like I said, it's not just me. I'm also working with our teams to kind of collect all of our resources. We have a portal set up so that our team can find information that they need really easily on their own. We schedule regular sessions. Usually I try to do them bi-weekly, but it'll be with people from across the organization who are, doing a quick training on a particular area, and people can tune in live, or they can watch the recording afterwards. So, you just kind of have to get creative when you're the one woman show. I think
the ratio is 1 to 100. Jeez.
Yeah.
Man. But
like, we've got our SDR teams, we've got an account management team, we've got our account executives, and 2 account executive teams that are selling different products. We've got field sales. We've got a whole bunch of teams that are working really hard on a lot of things. The good thing is, I work with a lot of people who are very smart and very resourceful, and a lot of the time they're able to kind of help themselves and share their information with the team. So it is a one-woman show, but it's really not just me.
Yeah. Well, I think it's great because I know other people that I've spoken to have mentioned the same thing, that they will pull in outside resources, other people, to be like, hey, I need your help with this. This is like what I need from you. And if you could assist, that would be great, because like right now I'm just, this is me. It's me and no one else.
Right. Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah. It's tough. It can be really tough.
Right. Okay. So this next question relates back to like the 20-minute increments. Mm-hmm. They wrote in, what are the alternatives? Say you have more than 20 minutes worth of information. When is it not training?
More than 20 minutes of information. When is it not training? I think I understand the question. So the way that let me know if I'm wrong about this. Feel free to send a follow-up. But so I think what you're saying is, if there's a lot of information to cover, you can't cover it in 20 minutes. I think that's totally fine. Try as much as you can to figure out what information is going to be useful in the classroom or in a live training session. If it's not going to fit into, and the way you can gauge that is, is this something that we're going to need to lead a discussion around? Is this something that you want to have Q&A around? Is this something that you want to create a safe space for practice in? If it doesn't fit into those areas, you can find other ways to share that information. You can do this with pre-assignments where maybe they're reading some articles about it. Maybe you do short mini videos that people can watch on their own time. The classroom training itself should be 20-minute chunks. You can also do 20 minutes, 10-minute activity, another 20 minutes, depending on how long you want to do their training. There's a bunch of ways you can get creative with it. But yeah, I think figuring out what resources you have outside of the classroom that your team can use, what activities you can create outside of the classroom, and then when you're in the classroom, what's the most effective use of that time.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers your question, but if not, let me know and we can talk more.
That was super helpful for me, and I didn't even ask the question. So Whitney, if that was what you were looking for, let us know. All right. Okay, so another one that she said nailed it. Yes. Nice job, Jess. Okay. All right. So with most training being remote these days, do you have any tips for keeping people engaged when you can't be together in the same room? I've struggled with getting people to keep their video on and to participate in discussions. So we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I also like the fact that she said that, or they said that they struggle with trying to keep people to have their video on, which I know is a thing too.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it depends on how mandatory you want to make that. I'm a fan of encouraging it, but if people can't, people have kids running around in the background and they don't feel comfortable having them. I get it. And I think
Right.
for me and the types of training that we're doing, it works. So figure out if that's something that you do need to require for yours. If not, again, I think it's really hard to not participate if you're in small groups. So I think you could set up, breakout rooms. Zoom allows you to do that really easily. I think a bunch of other conferencing tools allow you to do that too. But yeah, break it out into small groups, give people a task to work on together. They're gonna have to participate if they're in those smaller groups. You could also, give people pre-work, have them all fill out information ahead of time and maybe like a shared document or a shared sheet. And then when you get into the classroom, have each person go around and share a little bit. Those are some things you can do. And I think another important thing to keep in mind too is even if people aren't speaking up, it doesn't always mean that they're not listening and they're not learning. So being aware of that and kind of allowing for people to kind of process things in their own way can be really useful when you're thinking about setting up a learning environment that's safe. So
right. Is there any way you ever can gauge that to be like, okay, this person isn't speaking up, but are they learning? Is it something where you like directly go look at their training and say, okay, like they're actually passing everything, they understand everything that I'm training them on? I guess, how do you gauge that?
Yeah, a lot of the time you'll see that come out in activities that you do. So if you're asking them to break out and then you realize that they're like, wait, what are we talking about again? You'll know that they weren't, participating
Right.
or learning. So that's what I think the activities are so good for, is it's really hard for people to get so far past what what the objective was if you're only doing it in 20-minute chunks and then practicing it.
Right.
So having those activities will really highlight how well people are understanding or absorbing the information that you're sharing.
You are nailing these questions, by the way. People are giving you that. People are like, yes, that's exactly what I was needing to hear. That's great.
Oh,
And honestly, my CEO just had us do breakout rooms for the first time the other day, and they were amazing. And he's listening right now, so let's keep that up. All right.
Yeah, it can be really good.
Okay, so one of the last questions we have is, how do you determine the trainings you're going to run / lead versus trainings that you choose or select a facilitator internally to do?
Yeah, I am often not the person that is leading trainings, but that can change. That hasn't always been the case. It changes depending on the type of role that you're in. I think as a best practice, if you are not the expert in the content, but you are someone who is the expert in designing learning experiences, I think you could set up the structure for the training, ask someone who is a subject matter expert to help you kind of fill in the blanks, and then create a facilitator guide for them to lead the training. You can also do it in a way where if you are the person that's leading trainings, you can lead the information, confirm that you have the information right, lead the training, but have the subject matter expert in the room for when tricky questions come up that you can have them help with.
I'm so glad you said that, because that's exactly what I was about to ask. I was like, what if the SME maybe not, doesn't feel comfortable leading the entire training? I love that you're like, yeah, I have them in the room to answer those types of questions that, may come up every once in a while.
Exactly. And if you can't have them in the room, you can also, make it clear in the training that you want to collect all the questions, and then you can kind of follow up afterwards.
Awesome. Jess, this has been amazing. I feel like I learned so much in this, and I think everybody else did too. I feel like we're getting some good feedback.
That's so good.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much for joining us today and teaching us so much about these facilitator guides and, what it actually looks like to be a successful facilitator. So thank you.
And I think
it's been extremely helpful. Say that again.
I said, thank you everyone for joining. And you can all reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have follow-up questions. I'd be happy to talk more.
Awesome. So again, thank you, Jess, and for everyone who registered and was with us today. So we'll be sending out today's recording and one of Jess's templated facilitator guides, and I think maybe even some survey questions as well. So be on the lookout for those. And of course, everyone, have a great Thursday. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
See ya.